Well, let's just go ahead and get started. And if people trickle in, they're welcome to, but they'll miss all the intro, which is the most important part. So, if to be sure you're in the right spot, I'm talking about Mercury editor today and single directory components. One of which I know very little about, but they're they're super cool. And if a more back end dude like me can do it, then all of you can. All right, let's jump in. So a little bit about me. My name is Joel Steidl. I'm with Atten Design Group. Um, I've been there almost 16 years, which is so we can drive this year with the company, whatever that means. Um, if you're not familiar with Atten, we used to be a Denver-based company. We're fully remote, but we're a strategy, design, and development company, and we do great work. So, all right, let's start with just a few definitions of things we'll be talking about today. I always assume at camps like this that everyone's probably a little bit more like mid to expert level, but I don't want to make that assumption. So um, I'm curious, like, has everyone had some level of experience with like paragraphs module in Drupal? Seems like most everyone. Perfect. Um, so a lot of what I'm talking about today kind of starts with paragraphs as the foundational piece, and the reason why is because paragraphs is really good for creating flexible content components, and so a couple of years ago, we had the idea around like, hey, how can we make paragraphs was gaining a lot of traction in Drupal. Like, hey, how can we make this authoring experience better? And if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, just give me a minute. I'll give you a great example of why something like layout paragraphs in Mercury Editor was really needed. But layout paragraphs was kind of like our first take on this. It leverages Drupal's layout API to provide layouts to paragraphs. So that was kind of the baseline that allowed us to start doing that. And then Mercury Editor was kind of our next step in that of building a more visual experience around that. Mercury Editor is really just a field formatter on top of layout paragraphs. So you can uninstall it and use layout paragraphs just all the same. So we actually talk about the backwards compatibility of that as a good thing. And you can back all the way out to just paragraphs module if you needed to, and everything would just flow in a single column of content rather than like appearing in different layouts if you needed to. All right, and then single directory component or SDC. So, this was a contributed module until some point in 10. I don't know. I'll just throw out a number, 10.3 or something. When it came into core as like a foundational way of how you define a component in Drupal. And if you're like, what's a component? Because that component is thrown around so loosely in web development. In Drupal, it's really like a defined way of like bundling up CSS, JavaScript, and Twig, Drupal's templating language, to define a certain piece of functionality, whether that's like a call to action or an address card or fill in the blank. It's very loose, right? A component in Drupal can literally be anything you want it to be. It's not. Some people take maybe a more granular approach of what they mean by a component, but in the Drupal ecosystem, it's really whatever you define it to be. And then a module that is pretty cool. I haven't done a lot with it, but it's really interesting to me. It's called SDC display. And the thing I like about it is it kind of cuts out the middleman of needing to create extra templates in order to leverage your SDC components. So we'll take a look at that and see how quick you can add new components to your site. All right, so quickly, just some splash here. Mercury editor, effortless drag and drop publishing for Drupal. These are like the nice marketing pages to get you guys hyped for it. And the cool piece here, I think, is it works with any existing Drupal 10, 11, 12 site. If you're already using paragraphs, you can actually just like add this right in and start using it. So that's pretty fun and pretty compelling for a lot of sites out there that maybe already leverage paragraphs. So with Mercury, you can create and edit web pages using all your typical tools available to you in Drupal. So all your different field types, rich text fields. It doesn't matter. There's no limit. You can really customize what components people can choose from, and we'll get a look at that. And there's no limit as to how you can configure layouts. So what I mean by a layout is, let's just use something simple like a 2-column layout where you have a right and left column or something like that. Or maybe you want to get more complex and have 4 columns. Sky's the limit. Yeah. 5 columns? It's risky, but you can do it. All right, so real quickly, I want to go back in time and talk about past sins a little bit. Maybe some of you did this a little bit in Drupal 7 or maybe early in Drupal 8, but I would create something called like a container paragraph that maybe had columns baked into it, right? So my container paragraph would have like a right and a left column, and then you could start adding content that way. And the authoring experience was awful. And I'll give a good example of that here in a second. If you needed to move something between columns, you had to delete it, recreate the content in the other column, like nightmare authoring experience. No visual preview of what it looked like. It's just like field structure goes on forever. And migrations, taking an approach like that makes migrations really hard because you've got this like extra entity layer that you have to deal with the container paragraph. So, you've got your node, you've got your container paragraphs, and then you have paragraphs that go inside the container. It got really difficult. And I'll just open up an example here. So this is a site I worked on a good bit over the past year for Oberlin College, and this is their Drupal 7 site. And I'm going to pick on them and give them a hard time, but I did stuff just like this as well. So if we start scrolling through this landing page content type that they're very excited about, but look at this form structure. It's a complete nightmare. So that's just like the top panel content, right? And then you start getting, and all of this is super collapsible, right? Super user friendly. And then you get down to flex content, and boy, flex content is incredible. And look at how much of a nightmare this is. Let's just keep going. Like, how would you ever find what you're looking for, right? But like, I built stuff like this. I'm giving them a hard time, but I did this. And if we keep going down, it just goes. It goes and goes. Hold on. No, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Okay, so, and all right, what if I wanted to add like a new component, right? So in their approach, they had this their container paragraphs here, you can see like we could add a new screen width component, and then inside of there we can add components. You just end up with like form madness at that point. All right, so we clearly saw the need for something that was better than that. All right, so for Oberlin, just kind of like one interesting side note for them, they actually use paragraphs really well to create components, but the authoring experience was the broken part. So they maybe like overused it a bit. I think they had 50 paragraph types, but they were all serving very like specific purposes. So like in some ways they were using them correctly. But when it came time to write the migration for this, I'm like, dude, this is going to be tough. So if you ever have to do anything like this, I'll just quickly throw this up as an example of one way you can do this. I wrote a migrate process plugin. If you've ever done migrations, I thought this was fairly clever. But I took these container paragraph bundles, and essentially I would just the process plugin would extract the actual paragraphs I wanted out, and that's what I was able to migrate. So I just got rid of the container paragraphs altogether when I migrated into Drupal 10, and then that allowed them to. There were about 100 nodes like that. They had to rebuild them, but at least I migrated all the components over, and then they could start leveraging Mercury editor, and I'll share that here in a second. If you ever want to talk about migrations, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've done a lot. Why is it not go full screen? Okay. All right. So like I said, Oberlin was already leveraging paragraphs in a pretty compelling way. Like they had a whole design system. I forget the tool they were using, but something similar to Storybook to actually show all of their components that they had, and those were all tied back to paragraph types in Drupal. So like they clearly had an understanding of what a component was, and so they kind of like caught on to this idea of like, hey, let's like get rid of your container paragraphs, and like how would that translate to layouts in Drupal? And so that was kind of we built a bit of a map where we took their container paragraphs and said, okay, what do you need? What do you need out of a layout? Do you need any sort of styles associated? So for example, when you add a layout, do you need to be able to change the background color or change the margin and padding with that? And so we talked through all of that, and now the authors have a very familiar experience in Drupal 10. They're adding components that are named exactly like they were in Drupal 7. Just now they have the rich authoring experience. So that all went pretty well. And so the same node that I showed you in Drupal 7 with the form that just went on forever, if we go take a look at that now, this is all using Mercury editor, so a little bit easier to see. So this is, if you've not seen Mercury editor before, this is just essentially the node edit route gets replaced with a Mercury route, and you get the visual editing experience here on the back end. One thing that was interesting with Oberlin, I was curious if it would work. Their paragraph fields were broken up into 3 sections. So they actually have kind of like a header, body paragraphs, and a footer. And they did that because they wanted to be very rigid about the paragraph types that could be added to the header, the middle section, and the footer. And I was able to to kind of recreate that out of the box. So like if I delete this component here, you can see it says add top panel content, and we're limited to just a few options of paragraph types here. So, when you're creating that paragraph field, you say what paragraph types you want to be available. That's all we're doing here, right? So this is just a paragraph field, and we're saying these 4 types can be used. There's some nice options with Mercury Editor to allow you to group paragraph types like we're doing here. So out of the box, you would just get a flat list of paragraph types. Any questions about that? Cool. So I'm just going to refresh and get our page back. Now, if we get down into some of the content sections here, we can start seeing this was that massively nested form before. So in Mercury, there is a concept of a section paragraph type. It's not required. If you don't want to use layouts with Mercury, you're not forced to. So if you always want to use a single column, not a problem. You don't have to have a section paragraph. But if you want to start taking advantage of layouts, that's where the section comes into play. And let's just take a quick look at what a layout looks like in Drupal. So layouts can be defined in a theme or a custom module. It does not matter. And they're defined in a layouts.yaml file. If you've never come across this, if you've used Layout Builder in Core, it's leveraging the same layouts. So it's that same system that's baked right in the Drupal core. And so if we take a look, a layout's a little bit like defining regions in a theme, right? So in a layout, you're just defining regions essentially. There's a little bit more to it. But at the end of the day, the main thing that you'll probably care about are regions. So Greg, if you wanted your 5-column layout right here, we would just start adding more regions to this. And then if we get back into Mercury and say, hey, let's add a new section here, right? These are our layouts that we have said are available. That's actually defined. Like if we wanted to go, if you've not set this up before, let's go look at paragraph types here. And you can see they just have a ton. Sometimes that's the tough part of a migration, right? You can't necessarily get rid of stuff in the way that you would want to. Okay, so with any paragraph type, it doesn't have to be called section. That's kind of the default that we use. You enable that paragraph type to use layouts. So again, it doesn't have to be one called section, but it can be. And then you choose what layouts you want to be available here. So you can see some of the core layouts. So we could add 3 column, for example, and then that would become available. But let's jump back here for a second. So that's what's defining layouts. So if we add our 2 column here, now we've got our 2 different regions we can add content to. There's a really neat module. I think it's called layout paragraphs restrictions, and it allows you in a YAML format to be able to define what paragraph types can be placed into any layout, and then within a layout, which regions. So if you really want to lock down what sort of components can be added where. So for example, I think this Okay, and this, since it's like a 50-50 type layout, I think we're allowing essentially the same types in the right and left column, but you could really go crazy with that and say like, actually, you can only add certain types. I think a better example of that, or we can actually just change the. Okay, so in the right column here, we can add basic copy, a card, or an icon link box, whatever that is. And then here on the left, you can see we can add a few more component options. And if you've not seen what it looks like, it just opens up the modal. We're actually working on a 3x version that rather than a modal, it will have the screen off and to the right, so it doesn't cover up your content, and you get more of a full screen authoring experience. And then you can see like within here, we can just like drag and drop that stuff between columns as long as that paragraph type is allowed in the other column. It won't actually allow you to drag and drop if it's not like a defined type. Okay, so let's see. So anywhere we see a section, you can always swap out the layout that's being used for that particular section, which is, that was one of the limitations I talked about where in Drupal 7 or before this, you had to be very rigid about like, you actually had your columns were defined with fields, and that is extremely difficult to like move content between. So what happens if you switch to like body design? Yeah, let's go for it, because if I had to guess, the paragraph component in there right now is not allowed. So let's just see what happens. Okay, so it allowed. Let's see if it allows us. Okay, you see that? It won't allow us to drop it in. And I think there may be a patch out there that actually has some more helpful like warning message to the user, like, hey, like that component type's not allowed in that particular layout. So, any other questions while we're hanging out here on this screen?
Yeah, so this is very similar to my previous role layout, but it uses paragraphs instead of blocks.
Exactly. And a lot of times when you're like building out landing pages, only a portion of that may be like reusable content, or like you would intend to use on multiple pages. So we just felt like the paradigm of a paragraph actually makes a lot of sense in terms of like this content is custom to this page. Now, where you can still do things like reference media items if you are using like reusable video or images. The stuff that you would normally like want to reuse, you could still do so. But yeah, this Mercury's built really around paragraphs at this point.
So like that part, if you had that same.
Yeah, I think it does work. There's like a paragraphs library module. Has anyone used that before? Yeah. I think it is compatible with that, or I've not tried it, but I think with that, essentially it keeps a copy of like paragraphs that you want to reuse, and then you can just drop it in. There's a
paragraph from the library, then go to the page references. Yeah, but it does work with Mercury.
And there's also a like Mercury templates or something like that. I've not used that a lot, but if you have, it allows you to create like really complex components where you maybe are you have a layout with multiple components added already, and then your content authors can just like drop in a template as a starting point, which is pretty cool.
It's all paragraphs. It's like you're taking one different layout over there. field on.
Yep.
That's all.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And if you want to do stuff like insert a view block or something like that, you can, but you have to create a paragraph type that's like
Yeah.
views or whatever, and then you could use like block reference or something like that. So we've done that quite a bit, and that works pretty well. But yeah, in terms of like placing specific fields, I've seen people do it, like kind of with some interesting like approaches, but yeah, it's kind of a different use case than we were trying to provide just a more elegant experience than like layout builder and core. I think we can probably all agree that it's leaves something to be desired. It's kind of like a nice site builder tool, but I really want to give clients the
Do you use this for like simpler content types like a blog post?
Not usually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You use in that case.
like
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it depends. It depends on the complexity of content. Layout paragraphs can also be nice. Like, let's say for a blog, you do want to offer like 3 or 4 different components, but you don't want to go all in on like Mercury for that. You could use layout paragraphs, and it still provides a more visual authoring experience within like a normal node edit form. So
Good basic page content type, which all the other content just lay out to do like
and one thing to note with Mercury is here in the side panel that has popped open, you can place any other fields that are maybe more like metadata around, like if you have taxonomy or whatever, stuff that's not like visual. So let's say you in this case we have a couple like page settings. These are just other fields on this content type, and they're just like tucked away nicely in the sidebar.
Are you sure the style tab?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about that for a second. I'm not going to get super deep there, but let's take a look at that for a second. So there's another module that is part of the like Mercury editor ecosystem called style options, and it's for doing kind of what you would imagine. So we try to keep it very specific. So if it's a style options can be applied at the section level to like a layout. It can also be applied to a specific component. So specific paragraph types, and there's a few different style option plugins that are available out of the box. So if you want to do all of these, just get exposed directly to the component as like class attributes. That's kind of the default. So if you set one of these sidebar position, then you'll go see like a class name that gets attached directly to the component or to the layout with that name. So if you're doing, in this particular case, we were trying to match exactly what they were doing in Drupal 7. But there are some nice ones where there's like a visual like color picker, and you can actually limit which color options they can choose from. Or you could do something like you could pick contrast, right? So like you could have like a dark mode and a light mode for a component, and then you have CSS that swaps everything out between the two. So in case you're interested in that, I believe it's just style. We'll see if I get it right. Yeah, there we go. Style options is that particular module. And that exposes, you define those in YAML, and then that gets exposed to to the experience through this styles tab. And really behind the scenes, it's a paragraph behavior. And that's like paragraphs modules, like sort of extensible free form. Like I think it serializes the data as part of the, like when the paragraph is saved. Cool. So let's jump into actually the single directory component piece of this. I for one haven't created that many single directory components. So let's have a little bit of fun with it. It wouldn't be a good session in 2025 if we didn't use AI a little bit. So let's go ahead and, if you haven't done this before, I'm hanging out in VS Code. I'm going to drag in my theme. Someone created a bunch of these components. I did not. I'm going to add my components directory as context here for my agent. And let's see. Let's create a new component. I want to be able to mark certain pages as under construction. So create a new under what? Let's have a heading and description that scrolls across the page like a marquee. It should be very eye-catching. All right, let's see what it does with it. I don't create components, like I said, all that often, so let's see what it does here. And so I have VS Code in agent mode, so it's going to start doing stuff for me. You can. I'm not as familiar with PHP Storm. So check it out. It's looking at another component to figure out how to create one, which is pretty fun. And in case it completely blows it today, I've got another one that I created. This is I'm using Claude 4. So it's like doing its thing, right? It's building out our. So okay, components have a component.yaml file. Awesome. I'm playing a little stupid here, but you can see in the component.yaml file, it's that defines the properties of the component. So those will be the various pieces that can get passed into your Twig template, essentially. Yeah, so there are properties and slots. Slots are like, if you need to pass in fully rendered HTML, you would typically pass that into a slot. A property would be kind of like what you're talking about in your session, where it's advantageous to remove all the markup around a property. So a good example of a property is something like a heading, right? That's just like a very specific string. Probably no markup around it because your markup's going to be in your template itself. It's like we always want to be our heading to be an H2. We don't want any markup around it. We just want the string coming in. And so, what's it doing now? Oh, that's hilarious. So it's like trying to build it. I'm like, okay, whatever. So actually, I'm like, I don't know about how it's going to do with this. So let's just use the one I created yesterday because I know it works. All right, let's see. Peter wants to see it work. Let's do it. Okay, so let's let me jump back into this for a second. So under paragraph types, typically this is how this approach would go, right? We would, I bet it's going to be on page 2. All right, so I have a paragraph type that I've defined to get with my component, right? So typically my paragraph fields would match whatever properties I've defined in my single directory component. What's another way we could style a paragraph type? Just any thoughts on like another approach that you might take if you weren't using single directory components? Style on the theme, like create a paragraph template and do, like that works, but it's inflexible over time. Like single directory component, like I could use that multiple times. I also like how it organizes my like CSS and JavaScript for me. So again, kind of a nice advantage there. And real quick, let's go take a look. Let's go ahead and let's add some content here. Actually, let's edit a landing page. The arts page is very much under construction. So I'm going to add a 1 column here. And then let's go ahead and see. All right, there's our under construction. Pardon our dust. All right, perfect. Okay, so like by default, this is what we would expect, right? When you create a new paragraph, if we went and looked at manage display, it would look like just like this. And let's do that. So for this, we go to manage display, right? We've got like our labels appearing. So we could turn those off if we wanted, clean it up a little bit. See if it will actually pick that up if I just like edit and save. Yeah. So it re-renders. All right, we don't have our labels. Maybe if we were using the fences module, we could define some markup. Like that would be like a low-hanging fruit. But like I want to use my component I just created because it's going to look beautiful. And so typically how you would use a component is you would create a paragraph template. You would pull in the code to pull in your single directory component. You would pass the paragraph field definitions through to your properties in your single directory component. Like it's got a lot of work to like wire everything up, and then it's a little bit inflexible. So I found this this module called single directory component display. So you can turn that on, like after you install it, you get this single directory component options here, and we can say directly in the view mode, you can say render using a component. All right, cool. Let's find our under construction component here. And then what's really cool is you can start mapping your fields to the properties of your component directly in the UI. So this is kind of a nice like shortcut for doing this sort of thing. So we'll just do that. Background color, we'll just say not mapped, and text color not mapped. And then you can also have fixed values, which is really cool. So in this case, my component takes a background color property, but I could just hard code it right here. and it could be always the same color. But if I was using this elsewhere on like a different content type or a different paragraph type, I could change that color. Or we could have a field and pass that value in, right? So let's just save that. And again, I'm skeptical about what this will look like, but let's just see how AI did with it. We'll just edit it again and then save it. Okay, so if we built the CSS for it, it would probably be pretty cool. But hey, you know what? My component I created yesterday is way, way cooler. So let's drop that in. I'm sure it's very accessible, but let's just go ahead and drag, replace it. Hopefully the properties that it used are exactly the same. No. But I have to like clear cache or something fancy like that. Stupid AI.
I love the little emojis too.
Love it. So if I had to guess, something about like how it's mapped is different maybe. Under construction, heading, short description. Why aren't you working? I'm going to give up here in a second, but let's try and add it one more time. Okay, well, it was a good try. It was a really cool component. You just have to take my word for it. But we can go ahead and save it, and then exit out, right? I'm very bummed about my my demo here. What's up? I did. I cleared cache. What is wrong with this thing?
Try recreating it.
No, it shouldn't have to do that. But oh, you know what? My CSS is missing. Okay, that's the problem. All right, I think we're coming up on time here. I believe, is that right? 2:15. Cool. Any
2 minutes right to CSS. Have fun, right?
here?
Thanks for the component. I replaced it. Yeah. Finished mine. There we go. Sorry, keep missing.
I'm very motivated to get this done before we're over here. I mean, you guys have to see the finished style product. Well, while that's working, any questions from anyone in the room? Did you learn anything new?
Yeah. Do you just trash your default body field then, and you just start with a paragraph?
Typically, yeah, great question. So, like, typically I'll create like a, just a entity reference revision field. That's a paragraph called like field content, and then that's kind of the baseline. You set what paragraph types you want to be allowed, and then you can take that even further with the restrictions module if you want to do stuff like limiting paragraph types per layout and per region and stuff like that.
If you wanted to do the same on it on a new site, how much would you have to put the effort? Install the display module and remap the fields, or?
Yeah, that could be a case where like if you had a whole bunch of components that you wanted all the time, like that smells like recipes to me. If you're familiar with how they create a recipe, you could just package up the paragraph type and the SDC display as a config essentially, and then you could install the recipe on another site. That'd be a really like elegant way to do it, or you could just have AI build it on each site, right? And it takes way too long. All right,
so
let's.
the single directory, is that something that you all are doing?
Check it out. It's perfect. I don't know what it's doing, but it's doing something. What was the question?
So the single directory is kind of newer. Are you in on?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's part of the core now. One of the really interesting things you can do with that approach is you can there's nice integration with the storybook module and single directory components. So one thing we've started doing is like starting very early. Like if we have a big design system, we'll actually build all of it out in storybook to begin with, and then that's a nice like basis of building those components out in Drupal after that as single directory components. So yeah, it's and you know, I think the thing I appreciate is just SDCs are at least like a pretty defined way of approaching components, even as loose as it still is. Like it's, you know, you've got your YAML file that really defines like the type of content you're using, and it sort of strict types the type of content you can pass in. So it's pretty cool.
So if you were using the SDC display module, you have to make a paragraph template and then map the field.
Exactly. So it's, and sometimes that's maybe the preferred approach, right? Like if you need the pre-process stuff or get a little bit fancier with like conditionals or whatever, you may still want to do that. But this is kind of like the SDC display approach is really nice from a, like, if all you need to do is map field data directly to a component, you can bypass having like extra templates and all the extra work that goes into that. And it kind of allows like your managed display to be more flexible.
With the layouts in Mercury, like that you had something that like you put a block in one column, didn't access restriction. Would it still render that column like or is it smart? Or could you make it blocking with some other blocks?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm curious about how that would work. Like I could imagine like let's just say there's a block that only appears for like certain users. Yeah, you could probably, I assume the layout could be smart enough to know that it's empty at that point and like collapse the two column to a single column or whatever.
Yeah.
I haven't had that use case specifically, but
I'm just curious. I remember back in the panels. For whatever reason, didn't show up for particular reason. That's odd looking. Reason.
yep. All right, thanks for coming, everyone.